right? So I was saying this is hybrid text, which means that it's actually a combination of two different types of text. It's an information text, it's about heroes, and it's also a recount because it has, in the middle of this story, a recount of an encounter by one of the characters whose name is Autry, right? So you'll find that in the real world, you don't generally just have one text type, right? You generally have combinations of text types when you're reading, right? There'll be some information, there'll be some recount, there'll be some narrative mixed in, and there might even be some poetry, right? So those of you who read storybooks, you'll find that in the middle of a narrative, they might include some poetry or some verse, okay? So hybrid text are actually very common. And this is an example of one of them, all right? So I'm going to be looking at the questions and I'm going to be linking them to the text, okay? So the first question is, which three-word phrase in paragraph 1 has the same meaning as admire? Now, just to note here, please highlight or underline the words three-word phrase. So remember, we are looking at three-word phrase. If you give me a 2- or 4-word phrase, the answer would immediately be incorrect, okay? So the next thing is, I'm looking for a three-word phrase that corresponds to the meaning of admire. And it's 1 mark. So I just need to pluck 3 words out of the passage that has the same meaning as admire. And it must be 3 words consecutively, meaning the 3 words are together. They aren't found in different parts of the passage, okay? It's a 3-word phrase, meaning it's together. Look up to, and of course you realize that actually look up to is a kind of phrasal verb, right? It's a kind of phrasal verb. Look up to has this idea about admiring, even though the words look and up and to do not combine to give you that meaning. It's a phrasal verb, right, in definition. So yes, very good. Well done, okay. So the answer is over here in this first paragraph, and it's look up to, right? So that's our first answer, quite easy. You realize that in all comprehension passages, especially PSLE, the first 1 or 2 questions are always linked to the first paragraph, and the next 2 or 3 questions are linked to the next paragraph, and so on and so forth. There's a logical sequence to the questions, and they correspond to the paragraph order of the passage. So be a little bit careful that your answer belongs to the corresponding section. All right, so in this case, it's stated paragraph 1. All right, let's move on to the next question. Okay. All right. So the next question, explain clearly the difference in the way most of us define heroes as compared to psychologists. Okay, so this is a comparison question, and the key word here is difference, right? It's difference and compare, meaning whenever we have a comparison question, there must be 2 different groups that we are comparing. So my answer must contain 2 groups in order to get 2 marks, and that's why it's a 2-mark question, right? Because it's the most of us compared to the psychologists, and the way we define heroes will give us 2 marks, the difference, the comparison between the 2. Okay, so be very careful with comparison questions, right? There must be a comparison between the 2 groups that we are looking at. So why don't we just go ahead and try this out? How would I compare the difference between how would I or most of us define heroes as compared to psychologists, right? You'll find the answer in the first paragraph as well, right? So this is the first way in which we define heroes, right? People like us, right, define heroes in this way. And then, what about the psychologists? Remember, we have to compare, right? So the psychologists, again, I'm looking for the keyword psychologist, and I find it in the text over here. And this is how psychologists would define heroes. So you can see here that there's 2 definitions compared side by side, but I need to phrase my answer in a way that answers the question. So I have to explain clearly the difference, right? So what is the difference, right? So most of us define it this way, but psychologists define it this way. So I would use the word but in order to show the difference between these 2 definitions, all right? Someone who helped them or someone they look up to. So a hero can be someone we look up to or admire, all right? It may not be someone who directly helps us, right? So that is important because the definition is different there. Both the psychologists and all of us define heroes as people who help them. But the difference is that we also define people we look up to as heroes. So for example, if I look up to a Korean pop idol, if I look up to BTS, for example, they would be my heroes. But have they helped me? No. So we've got to read the question, the difference, right? The difference. So this is how I would answer the question, right? So we define heroes as people who help us or whom we look up to, right? So that's first part. But psychologists define them as people who willingly put their lives in danger to help someone else. So notice I am comparing with the use of the word but. That can also be acceptable. But can you see here, if I leave out the part about someone we look up to, my answer will be incomplete or incorrect. Okay? Because remember, it's a comparison question. The moment you don't show the difference or the comparative difference between the two, you stand a very grave risk of getting 0 out of 2 marks. And here is where they differentiate between students who are able to understand a question and students who only have a partial understanding of the question. And in this case, partial answers can get a 0 mark. Okay, so be very careful here. Comparison questions are planted to kind of trick you into answering partially. So be very thorough in the way that you answer and remember to compare the two groups, okay? So I hope you learned that. Comparison questions, very tricky. Now let's move on to the next question, all right? State one difficulty that researchers face when they compare a normal person to a hero. So this is quite an easy question, all right? So it's one difficulty, right? The key word is one difficulty when they compare a normal person to a hero, right? So I'm only looking for one difficulty, but the key here is that I must understand what the text is saying. So it's a 2-mark question, and the reason why it's 2 marks is because in order to answer this question, I have to understand the word baffle. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I'm going to ask all of you to kind of guess, or without checking on an online dictionary or on your phones, kind of look at the context, right? Researchers are baffled by what makes a hero act differently from a normal person. In fact, researchers find it easier to understand what causes people to act in an evil manner than in a heroic manner. So they find it easier to understand evil than it is to understand heroic behavior. So what does this suggest about the word baffle? Can anyone kind of surprised, shocked, confused? Very good. Yes, shocked and surprised. So in this case, if researchers are baffled or they're not really sure, uncertain, shocked, confused about how heroes act differently, then what is the difficulty, right? The difficulty is that they have problems, they have trouble, right? They are unable to or uncertain about how to explain what makes a hero act differently from a normal person, okay? So in this case, I have to explain the word baffled, okay? I cannot just plug the word researchers are baffled by what makes a hero act differently from a normal person and put it there. I've got to explain, right? So they find it difficult to understand what makes a hero act differently from a normal person, okay? So in this case, right, if you just write, researchers are baffled by what makes a hero act differently from a normal person, you would get 0. Why? Because I have to explain the difficulty, right? So the word here is difficulty, right? Difficulty. I have to explain why baffled presents a difficulty. So notice when I answer the question, I use the keyword from the question in my answer. They find it difficult to understand. They're baffled, right? They don't understand. What makes a hero act differently from a normal person? And this key, difficult to understand, this key is what makes my answer fully correct with 2 marks, okay? If you just lift the answer, you will not get the correct answer. So you've got to explain baffled, okay? You should have highlighted and you should have underlined and you should have written down the answers as what you see me do in the passage and in the question. All right? Right. So, in addition to bravery, integrity, and kindness, what two other traits does Dr. Farley think that heroes have? Okay, so traits refer to characteristics, right? Like kind of nature kind of thing. So in this case, bravery, integrity, and kindness have already been mentioned. The question's asking you for two more out of and other than these three. Okay, so let's go ahead and just underline the two other traits. So I'm looking for two traits and it's labeled 1 and 2, very kindly done so by the question. And it's 2 marks, so I'm looking for 2 words, just 2 words or phrases that answer the traits or characteristics. Okay, all right, so the 2 other traits are here, right? I cancel out courage, integrity, and kind nature because these are already mentioned as bravery, integrity, and kindness. So don't be thrown off. Courage and bravery are the same. Integrity the same. Kindness, a kind nature, the same. So I cancel them out. I cannot use any of these 3. I have to use the other 2, which is, like you all correctly mentioned, intelligent and a risk taker. All right, excellent. Okay, so these are the 2. Very, very easy, right? So far, so good. This question is quite easy. I shan't spend too much time explaining. Let's move on now to the next rather tricky question. Okay, so a bit of a warning. 75 is quite tricky. So let's take some time to look at it, okay? Right, so 75. What was Autry doing in New York one day? And this, all right, is what? Be very careful. Some of you have a tendency to answer where when you're asking for what. So that's why I always remind you to circle, underline, bracket, right? So circle the question word to remind you this is a what question. And what was he doing in New York? In New York, right? One day. So, all right, since I told you this is a tricky question and it's only 1 mark, why don't you try to answer, right? Before I go into explaining, all right? So go ahead, give it a try. Right. Always be very careful. Do not be in a hurry. Think things through, right? Many of you have a tendency to be rather impulsive in the way that you respond. So be very careful. What was he doing? What was he doing? Let me go through what are the wrong answers, okay? Before I tell you what's the correct answer, okay? He was waiting at the subway. Wrong. 0. He was waiting for the train to come. 0. He was waiting for the train at the subway. 0. Why? What was he doing? He was waiting to board the train, right? So he was waiting to board the train. Let me show you, okay? So he was waiting on a platform. There are 75 people waiting on a platform, right? They were waiting in order to get onto a train. He was waiting to board a train on the New York subway platform. So the key word here, he is waiting to board a train, right? He is waiting, not waiting for a train. Can anyone tell me what's the difference between waiting for a train and waiting to board a train? Is there a difference? Yes. Yes, there is a difference, okay? There's a big difference, right? If I'm waiting for a train, I could be waiting for someone to get off the train to meet that person. So I'm waiting for a train to come in so that I can meet my friend, right? But is that why Wesley Autry was at the platform? No, he was waiting to get onto the train so that he would get somewhere else, right? He was waiting to get onto the train to travel somewhere else, like the 75 other people waiting with him, right? Waiting to board the train, I'm waiting for the train to arrive and then going to get on it so that I can move with it somewhere else. So in this case, Autry was not just waiting for the train at the platform, he was waiting to board a train. So deceptive, tricky question, right? So a lot of you are going to write he was waiting on the subway or he was waiting for a train on the subway. So be very careful over here that you give the complete answer to the question, all right? So that's question 75, all right? He was waiting to board a train. Okay? Right. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Question 76, all right? So this is a true-false question. Let's take a look at this. It is likely that brave and smart people are heroes. Let's begin with whether it's true or false, shall we? It's likely that brave and smart people are heroes, all right? Take a look at the two extracted texts that I've placed above it. You can kind of infer whether it's true or false, but the challenge is in explaining why it's false, right? Yes, false. Okay, so you're absolutely right. Okay, it says here, a hero is intelligent and is a risk taker. So brave and smart, right? Risk taker is brave, intelligent is smart. So yes, hero is intelligent and smart. And many of us have this same characteristic. So many of us are like heroes. They are intelligent and smart. We are also intelligent and brave and smart. But what does it mean? Does it mean that we will act in a heroic manner when the situation calls for it? This is what is called a rhetorical question, right? So the answer is mostly quite clear, and the answer is no, right? Not all of us will act. Most of us will not, in fact, because it says here, out of the 75 people who stood on that platform with Audrey waiting to board the train, only one person jumped onto the track, right? And that was Audrey, okay? So the answer is clearly false, right? And how I explain this? Very simple. Many of us are brave and smart. So I've got to mention the fact that many of us are brave and smart, but we would not act in a heroic manner, right? When the situation calls for it. Like Audrey is optional. You might want to mention Audrey, but if you don't, you can just say many of us would not act in a heroic manner when the situation calls for it. Okay? And that's backed up by the passage, right? It's very clear in the passage that out of the 75 people who stood on that platform and witnessed the young man collapsing, only one person jumped in, right? As we can see from the example of Wesley Autry. Okay, very good, well done. Okay, so I hope that this is quite a clear answer, but remember the reason must always support your true-false statement. Okay, your reason must always support your true-false statement. Okay, right. Let's carry on with the next section of the same question. All right, so some commuters pushed a young man onto the train. This is quite clearly false, right? Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time with this. It's quite clear that it's over here, the answer, right? He suffered a seizure, right? So he wasn't pushed. That's false, right? He suffered a seizure and fell onto the train tracks, okay? So the key word here is that he suffered a seizure and fell. He was not pushed, okay? So the word is fell onto the train tracks because he suffered a seizure, okay? So this is pretty straightforward. I shan't spend too much time with this particular question. Let's move on to the next question then, or rather the next part of the same question. Right, most of us would not jump onto the tracks to rescue someone who had fallen there, right? So I'm pretty sure you all know the answer to this, all right? Right, because it says here, over here that only one person, right? Only one person. So out of the 75 people waiting on the platform, only Audrey jumped onto the tracks, okay? So this is the reason why it is true that most of us would not jump, all right? If we were part of that group of 75 people, we would certainly not be the ones to jump. At least I think so. If you are perhaps heroically inclined, then you might be one person to jump down like Audrey, okay? But in most cases, right, the answer would be No, you'll probably be paralyzed with fear or will be rooted to the spot in shock, right? Because we're not really sure what's going on, okay? But Audrey's instinctive reaction was to actually jump onto the tracks, okay? So out of 75 people waiting on a platform, only Audrey jumped onto the tracks. And that supports the true statement that most of us would not jump onto the tracks. Okay, so according to paragraph 5, what can be discouraging to us? So the tricky part here is to find the word discouraging, because actually this word discouraging does not appear in the passage, but you realize that there's a word that is very similar to it. You can tell from the form of the word, right? Discouraging, disheartened. Yep. Can you still remember what is the name of the section of a word that appears before the root word that changes its meaning? Remember, we learned about this. There are some sections that appear before the root word. There are some sections that appear after it. Bonus, if you can remember. Yay, wonderful. So before is prefix, right? So a prefix of dis, dis, changes the meaning of the word to its opposite form. So heartened becomes disheartened. Encouraged becomes discouraged, okay? So I change by using the dis, which is a negative prefix that changes the word to its opposite meaning. And what is the, yes, that's right, Reese, the section that comes after a root word is the suffix. And suffixes don't change meaning, they just change the word form. So ed, es, ing, these are suffixes that come to the end of the root word that change its form but not its meaning. So remember, prefixes and suffixes help us to guess meanings of words. And in this case, discouraged, disheartened, they share the same prefix, and therefore they are very strong clues that show us these two words are related. And in this case, discouraged is disheartened. Prefix, suffix, remember, everything you learn in English comes together in comprehension and composition. So try to remember everything that you've learned so that you can apply it in your reading comprehension and your writing composition, okay? All right, after having said all of that, let's get back to the question. Paragraph 5, what can be discouraging? So I found the word disheartened. Therefore, the answer should be within the radius of that word disheartened, okay? So looking at the keyword and finding the answer near to it is one of the tricks and one of the techniques of effective comprehension, okay? So 2 marks, what can be discouraging? So I'm looking for 2 parts because it's a 2-mark question. So I cannot just answer with 1 part, it has to be complete. So let's move on. So how can we find this answer? Is disheartened? Wait, right? I'll just cue you in, right? So I'm using the same word discouraging to answer discouraged, right? So I don't use the word disheartened, I use the word discouraging because that's the word in the question. Remember, the question is the king. I want to use the same words from the question to answer it. So we could be discouraged, right? So what can be discouraging? We could be discouraged. So I'm using the same words to answer, right? We could be discouraged because we do not think that we would jump onto the train tracks to save the young man when he fell. Okay, so 2 parts. We don't think we'll jump when we see the young man fall, right? So there are 2 parts to this. We are discouraged because we don't think we could jump when we see the young man fall. So that's kind of how I would answer a 2-mark question like this. And I'm using the same words in a question to answer it, okay? Okay, I think you can even guess the answer without really reading the passage, right? Okay, so very quickly, just give me the order. What's the first, what number should come first, second, and third? Right, so the table below compares normal people like us with heroes. Fill in the blanks with the information from the passage. So this again is very, 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 very easy. Okay, so you should be able to find the answers from the passage. So our brains are wired to fight or flee. All right, so in this case, I think most of you would write the word flee, but take note of this word away, right? So if I put flee here, it wouldn't really make sense, right? Flee away is not an appropriate or grammatically correct phrase. What would I need to change the word flee into? Everybody, please type in your very quick, short answers in the live stream chat. So I need to change the word flee to run. But remember, in comprehension, you don't get penalized for grammatical errors. So if you write flee, I would technically give you a mark, but then it's not proper English. So please, let's not do that. Okay, it's run away. Okay, yep, run away, run, 子婷, not flee, run. Okay, good, run. Okay, exactly. Right, so run away, right? So that's normal people. What about the hero? Okay, what would the hero do, right? The hero's natural instinct makes him jump into a dangerous situation instead of fleeing. So instead of running away, what does the hero do? His brain tells him to jump into a dangerous situation. So I'm following exactly according to what the passage gives me. In this case, plucking the answer out of the passage and into your answer key is not wrong, right? You will get the full mark for that because that's exactly what the hero does. He jumps into dangerous situations where normal people would run away or flee. Okay, so quite a simple, easy to do section, and that's question 79 part 1. Let's go into part 2 now. This one actually is quite straightforward. Audrey does it in order to save. So most of us would take care of ourselves, but he acts to help others. Okay, so this is quite straightforward. It's a logical answer, right? Normal people would take care of themselves. Heroes take care of others. Heroes take care of others. All right, so that's kind of the answer. Would you like to be a hero, right? And I'm just going to give you my answer. There are several possible answers, but very simply, I would take the answer straight from the end of the passage, right? And I would say, yes, I would like to be a hero so that I can catch a glimpse of the wonder of the human spirit. I can be proud to be a part of. So I can actually rephrase the last sentence to answer the question because it just so happens that it does. This kind of a question, very rare. It's an easy last question, but in most cases in comprehension, the last question will ask you about your thoughts or feelings or your responses, and it tends to be more open-ended, and you can kind of answer, but you must always support with a reason or with a part of the text that appears in the comprehension. All right, so with that, I have finished modeling the entire comprehension passage, how I would answer it. You would find that at the end of your session, you have highlighted certain parts of the text, you have numbered it, you have underlined the questions, and you have highlighted the marks. This is the kind of method you should pursue in your exams. Okay, so at the end of your exams, you should see that all the sections on your text have been highlighted and all the questions have been annotated so that you know exactly what is the keyword to look out for, how many marks is allocated, and how you must answer the question.